Hello, today is Monday, September 30th, 2019. This is the Testing Commons subproject office hours, a subproject of Souq Testing. I will go through our agenda. If you have details, please add them to the agenda. And if you could add your deets to the meeting notes, that would be awesome. So let me share my screen. Give me 1 second here. Reduce my tab count here. Hopefully folks can see my screen.
Yep.
All right, so I didn't have much on the agenda this week, and I did ask George to do a triage run to see where we're at, because I know there are a lot of PRs that are light. I've been busy, and other people have been busy, and most of the folks working on this effort are part-timers. So I think George probably wrote this initial one here. Is that correct, George?
Yes, so if you look in the triage PRs, that is actually the full list of all the PRs labeled with the area E2E test framework. The list that I added in the docs are the ones that actually need some attention. Some of the other PRs, they are either a work in progress or have something else wrong that we can just hold off on them for later. But if y'all want to go through the entire list, only 13 PRs.
Okay. I don't know if we want to go through everyone or if we can want to start with the ones that you highlighted first. Why don't we start with this one?
Yeah. So that one is actually mine. So this is I kind of want to propose this. So there was an issue that Andrew created to start cleaning up the util file, util.go file in the framework.
Yeah.
And this is really a really straightforward cleanup. There are a bunch of skip related functions. So just move them to another file within the framework.
I don't have strong opinions here. The whole purpose of the federated portion is the primary function is to remove the depth graph of the transitive depth closure of things that would be included in utils. I kind of think skip, now this is my opinion, I kind of think skip is fundamental to, or pretty close to, the chest of the framework itself.
I think that's why it's in a separate file in the same package still.
Yeah, it's still within the framework. I guess the big issue that we are seeing right now is that the util file. During the last release, we actually brought it down for 6,000 lines to 3,000 lines right now, but it's still a lot of clutter.
Okay, I don't have any problem with this at all. This seems totally fine.
Yeah,
as long as it's still in the framework.
Yeah, I think like one suggestion I made way back would have been to have just a wrapper.go file, which wraps not just the skip functions, but like any function that just wraps a Ginkgo command in the end. But I don't know if we want to be more specific with the files, or maybe like wrapper.go is too generic.
What's the size of this file? 200 lines? I'm okay. Like I'm super old school when it comes to code structure. Anything that goes beyond like 300 lines of code, I usually determine that it has to be its own file. That's pretty pedantic, but it's also old school. I think it's easier to find the details directly on initial inspection. So I'm totally okay with this the way it is.
Okay, awesome. And the other follow-up to this is to just keep doing this type of refactoring. Not exactly the same, but still in the util.go files, there's a ton of really random functions that should be included in the other subpackages. So just going to keep going at it until it's been as clean as possible.
Yep, that's fine with me.
Yeah, and one thing I find that we haven't been doing enough is just verifying that a function, if it's just called in So there's a lot of functions that are just called in one place. And so in that instance, I think we should do the extra effort of just like duplicating it or just moving it entirely into like the actual test package that's using it and then remove it from the framework. Like even for functions that are called in two places, like I'd argue like small duplication is better than like kind of bloating the framework and then supporting it. So like, I feel like maybe we should have some guiding principle that says like, if it's called in at least 3 places, then we can have it in the framework. Otherwise, just do a small duplication and move on.
That's awesome. That has actually come up in multiple reviews. Is that something that we should outline in some docs or just something to keep in mind during review time?
I think something to keep in mind during your review time, and also call it out as part of the review. Be like, I removed, or we followed the rule of 3 when doing this PR.
Okay.
This one was closed.
This one I actually just checked right now. There was a circular dependency issue. So from the conversation, last week's conversations with Omichi, one of the issues that was open while we were not having issues, that is that we are going to start moving all the tests from E2E log to the actual framework. And I guess this one they had a circular dependency and not able to import the framework.
Whenever we fix the logging issue, just let me know. It took me a while to swap those bits back in. I don't know. I still don't have, I understand what the problem is. I still think it's unfortunate, but I don't really care enough to care. Delete test namespaces asynchronous. This has been existed forever, but this is like an updated, this is an actual PR to fix the problem.
Yeah, I guess. And that, I guess the important change is that one in the framework.go. That change is in the after each function.
Yeah, but it doesn't actually solve the problem of the fact that like the namespaces still exist, right? Like you still get namespaces stuck in deleting forever because the finalizers are stuck.
Yeah.
So Clayton says in the issue that like he says, quote, now that namespace solution is reliable. So I'm wondering like what changed recently that makes it reliable now? I'm wondering.
Also, the second paragraph, right there, he makes mention of how to, I guess, make it more robust.
All right, well, this is on the to-do list to look at today. Andrew, I wouldn't mind you taking a look at this too if you haven't already.
Yeah, I will.
That's been a thorn in the side for a long time. Ginkgo update plus stack fix.
Here.
Oh, this is the this is Patrick's one. I put a comment on it that we updated Ginkgo, but he's not updating Gomega. So I could get updated, but it's unrelated to the problem the PR solving the projects are loosely related. So Ginkgo 110.1 should be a valid combination. Well, not in the vendoring. I looked. Is he even on this call? I don't think he is. I looked in the vendor stack for Ginkgo, and Ginkgo's vendor stack actually calls out Gomega, that specific version. So if we're going to update to 110.1, we should update. I looked at, why don't we just do it while everybody's here, because it'll be fun.
Yeah, I think I ran into something similar with that later, just like the difference between the Bazel builds and the vendor and different build flows, I think had different versions.
Mm-hmm. Hold on. Is this an updated build or something? Or is it just structured as a pure library? I'm looking for like the lock file, the Right. I'll have to dig that back up. I'll leave this one open. But I did take a look at the depths for this and saw that updated version was called out explicitly from 110.1. Update E2E testing, no port service, listening on the same port but different protocols. I don't necessarily know if this doesn't look this conformance.
That's actually a thing that I was wondering. I was triaging a couple issues that were explicitly labeled as E2E framework. They look more like just general test fixes in the ballpark of the conformance group, but people still kept begging me to add them back into the E2E framework. So I just wanted to explicitly mention that and ask if that is the way to. Okay, so that's the answer.
It's not. You can just tell right away. Like just on like cursory inspection, you can tell this is related to a specific set of tests, and you can see that you're only calling out the test files themselves, right?
Yeah.
So that they're not even in the framework directory at all. So this is service jig, but still,
we should get rid of service jig because I think it was just added way back as like a I don't know what it does like exactly, but it's like a sub framework for service tests, which I think like the core framework, there's nothing in the core framework that can't do what it does. So I think we should just get rid of it.
So John should really own this particular type. Anything that's networking related, John should really own this. So
also, one really quick note: there were a couple issues that are in the ballpark of conformance that I kept, and the reason that I kept them is that they actually require framework approvers to move forward. I think that was one of them.
okay, let's work on the next one here. Replace user. Okay, this is one of those ones that's I can't do this. Only testing. Only the test info folks can actually do this.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of use cases. I had put up just one attempt at it, saw a bunch of failures, and I haven't got around to actually trying to fix it up at all. So that's nowhere near ready, but was just a first pass.
So if it's something like that, you should mark it as WIP.
Okay.
Because that way it's clear to us that it's not ready for print. It's not ready for final review. Otherwise,
Yeah. Sorry about that.
For the PR, should we keep that in the E2E test framework?
So this particular one, it's a good question. I don't.
It was part of the image centralization was the idea because we moved a lot of the functionality that we needed into the AGN host, but then hadn't updated all these tests. So that's why it was originally related to this group.
Is it marked conformance? Because it affects conformance. I don't know. I'm fine either way, so long as it passes the test. But we definitely need when. Let's wait until you're ready, and you can come back to it.
Okay.
Watch isn't.
Yeah, sorry. That last one also just needs approvers for the framework to move forward.
Okay, so these are the three that I need to address.
Yes, please.
All right, that makes my life easy. Super duper helpful. Then I can like batch them and just do it all at once. Highly appreciated. Action item.
And the action item to look at Hippie's proposal for the unicorn test framework. I also moved that one from the last meeting we had. I don't think we actually ever got to discussing it, or at least discussing the final version of it.
Yeah, some of these things are really hard to solve. This one in particular is super thorny. It's because we don't actually do component config yet. And there's a bunch of issues that are related to this that actually been pushed up. I've been fighting Googlers of all people, which I thought was interesting, because they're not resourcing any efforts with regards to component config. They started down this path a long time ago, but there's no one working on it. Mike Toffin does it part-time. But I don't know how they can push some of the tests that they're trying to push because they're dependent upon a very specific configuration, which is not part of the standard configuration. Pain points parallelization.
Is there some documentation we could create to make it easier and faster for getting those feature gates enabled so that it's maybe not as cumbersome for those folks?
This one, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with configuration. So it's not necessarily feature gates. They're like, if you have this flag enabled on this component, which could be a feature gate, the feature gates are specifically called out with the feature tag. So those those usually have their own test set up for them. The question that they've tried to do is, what about config flags, right? Because there's feature gates, and those are pretty broadly covered by feature colon whatever. But what about configuration flags, where we test the defaults, but we want to be able to test these other incantations? And the answer is we don't, unless you have automatic detection, you can't really broadly enable this. And the automatic detection, the grand unified field theory for this is to use component configuration, which is to basically store in well-defined types, very similar to API machinery, the configuration for components on the cluster as a config map and version those appropriately. The problem is only 2 of the components have well-defined configuration file formats so far, and it's been really slow to move the community. I really do think we need to resource this effort. I wish people would work on it and take it seriously. But I don't know how to, other than me kvetching about it, I don't know how to make it go. Maybe I should make a blog post. Maybe the answer to this is like a precondition before we could even do some of this. Like if we had a pony, because this is some of the pony things, even before you could even start there, like we need some broader enablements to be done. So maybe I can start to draft a blog post about like where things need help in the community. I always get these, here's a broader question too, to the group. I always get these statements that Kubernetes is hard to contribute to, and part of that's totally legit. And part of it's, I think, a little bit self-serving. Like if you ferret around enough, you can probably figure out your way. So the question is like, how do we make it easier to identify these key things that require effort to be resourced? And how do we get them unblocked and rolling? I think it's a broader question, I guess. Probably not germane to just this group. Bueller, nobody. So
I'm on board.
So this part here, this is already being done by John. Parallelization, I'm not terribly concerned by.
So I think I added that, if that was the part I did, was about, like, we have the ability with Ginkgo to do dry runs, but that just will tell you what tests get executed, but it won't execute any other logic. And instead, I think it would have been nice to be able to grab other data. So you could say, like, as you're walking the test, do something else with the call stack or something. So like, do these tests and see if you hit SSH code. Do these tests, see if you hit conformance tests or disruptive this or this. You know, not just looking at the tags and the test name. but you actually need to be able to do something more complicated, if that makes sense.
I don't know if that's a. It'd be nice if features could be easily bubbled up so that it could be discovered. What tests use feature? Oh, I see what you're saying.
You know, like there's some static analysis tools that try and do this sort of stuff. I forget that one of them was like Guru, but you can say like, tell me where this function gets called from, and it tells you one possible call stack that gets you there.
Mhm.
But effectively, what it would be nice to be able to do for a test suite like this is be able to say, look, tell me all the tests that this hits, or in this particular test run, like, do I hit this function ever? And that sort of analysis I've just found is really hard. And maybe part of that is because, right, we want to know all the possible pathing through the call stacks to get there.
I mean, you
but then
could
also
use
I'm on a
generic.
Mac, which complicates things for the build.
So I think like generic coverage tools could probably simplify a number of this stuff. I have even run like code coverage on the framework to see what actually even. I guarantee you there has to be code that's dead code inside of the framework. If not signatures, then actual code paths that are exercised.
I think there's two paths that we've already looked at this at. One is the code runs that already run alongside on the Prowl jobs. And then early on, we were capturing at the time of entering the it, when we would do, I think we modified client Go temporarily, it didn't get merged, to actually submit the call stack at that moment when it's reaching the API server, so that we could see, at least from the API server side, what pieces of code were getting utilized when we were talking to the API server, in order for us to see what parts of the framework were being used.
I think this statement needs to be refined so it's actionable. Like I understand the broader thing, but how do you actually interpret this into concrete action might be beneficial. But still at the same time, like there are other efforts that are required before we can actually get this thing done. I think it's good to have this list and take a look at it, reevaluate it from time to time. But this one in particular, I think, requires a little bit of refinement.
Now, are you saying refinement just in terms of clarification, or you want a set of like clear implementation ideas, like it needs to do it and it needs to do it this way so that it's
clarification and exact user stories, like user story A versus user story B, and potential options to address user story A or B.
Okay.
The other thing that kind of comes to mind, I don't know how broadly useful it could be, is and we also talked about this previously, was about refactoring the test context for the framework. And from the code that I've seen within the framework, we could also get some useful information, just actually making it easier to actually provide some information for users. You know, if you set this field in the test context to such a value, then you're going to use SSH, you're going to use these functions, and so on, and blah, blah, blah.
If we had well-defined component config, you could have the types for that actually outline the details for it. So I think stage 1 would be breaking apart the larger test config. Stage 2 would be like switching the test config to be well-defined component config style types. And then if they're well-defined types, we can basically put in the entire the Go doc block that would outline how do you use it, the details there. One thing that's frustrating as all hell to me is if you look at the Go documentation for a lot of our types, you'll find that they're very lacking with regards to the details of the implications of switching the knobs. You have to ferret through the code to understand.
So I'm not super familiar with the whole idea of component config, but what will be a good first step to try to just start doing the things that you mentioned?
Do you know
That was-
who Lee is?
Yes.
So go to the component and standard working group,
Mhm.
and hold on, wrong page. Working group component standard, and I believe he actually has. I just added you on Slack. I believe he actually has documentation on getting started in a new user orientation. So he's got both. So that actually, I would go through the orientation stuff, and then I'll take a look at the other details that are there, and he can probably help get you up to speed pretty fast. But that is the overview.
Okay, sweet. Thank you so much.
All right. Is there anything else that we need to address? I think let's take a look at our priorities here. We're still refactoring the framework. User experience, that's the test config. P2 is during performance. So I still think we're generally approaching these in the priority order that we had.
I had one question for John. What happened to that PR with the taints that are gonna not block tests or something like that? Was that merged?
It was, yeah. So that we modified it based on your recommendation, I think it was, to have it just be a comma-separated list of names rather than a regex. So it cut out some of the code. Yeah, so all that's in.
Yeah, there was two parts to that problem though too, right? And like we solved
thank you for the reminder. I do need, I failed to create the second issue for that. I'll do that. And to clarify for other people, the second issue is, what if somebody has every node tainted and they want to make the test workloads actually tolerate that taint? So the first problem was just you want the test framework to start, even though your nodes may not appear to be ready because they're tainted. But the second thing is, well, can you actually make the test mutate every test workload that's about to start to tolerate your whatever workload?
Your whitelist of taints.
Yeah.
But and it's a common problem that exists for a lot of people.
So you say it's a common problem. Do they do that to try and like prevent someone from accidentally starting a workload? They just add extra barriers to starting?
Part of it's because they're highly controlled environments. So yes, they taint nodes on startup with their own incantations because they like to control it, make sure that they know what's going on.
Okay. And we can discuss on the issue too when I make it, but we do think it's going to be similarly simple, just like a straight list, and all the test workloads will be mutated to tolerate those, right? There's no extra knobs that they need, because I can imagine someone wanting like awkwardly fine-tune control, like, oh, well, I have these 3 different types of taints and I want to sometimes use one and sometimes use another if this feature is used, or...
I don't think it gets to that. The common use case that I see if we follow the 80-20 rule, which is like my general pattern for everything in Kubernetes, is what's the 80%, how do we solve the 80% use case problem? Is that the people have a default set of whitelist taints. Now you could get fancy with it, but I think we would wait until we see what the feedback is from the wild. But I do know that it's been requested to be able to whitelist by a number of times. That's happened both in the Sonabuoy repo as well as the upstream KK repo.
Okay.
Yeah, just a small note. We usually taint the master node whenever we run tests on the Windows test jobs. So it would be a good idea not to enter a default taint, which will be enabled to all tests, for something that will break all the Windows jobs.
Yeah.
We typically taint the master node with something like this actually.
No, this is just in case you want to run workloads on those nodes.
We don't, because we
Right,
do
so
not,
like the
we do
default
not
would
test,
just be life as normal for everybody else.
yeah, well, basically we taint the nodes with something like this. If you check the chat.
Yeah, we would not change the default behavior. The
Mhm.
only reason for adding a whitelist is to enable users who defaultly set up node taints as part of their setup. This is super common for people who use things like Cluster API. There's a ability to taint your nodes on entry, and people use this all the time with provisioning tools because they want to have a default policy for whatever they're doing. So it's really common, but it wouldn't affect the default user scenario. So Claudia, you
Okay.
added a comment here.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, I'm kind of stuck on multiple pull requests because of this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had zero progress because of this. But basically, we should have some staging repo for the test images that we have. So the image promotion process automatically promote those images to the official repo. This thing has been commented to one of my pull requests, the 811701, because apparently we don't manually build and publish the images anymore. So we basically need the staging repo. We need at least 2 extra pull requests, one on Kubernetes one, and another one in the test infra repo, which defines the job. And I have actually added a couple of questions and concerns to the pull requests I've mentioned, because we actually have about 30 images in the Kubernetes test images folder, and if we modify one of the images, will that actually build and publish all the images?
So this
know?
falls squarely into the both test infra and the K8s infra working group because they own the images as well as the generation for it. Like we we own the test framework, but that doesn't necessarily help here. So
Yeah,
that's the
okay.
reason. So on your issue, that's the reason I poked the test infra admins. They're the
Okay.
ones that own it, so I can't. My default answer would be like go talk with Veda and what's her name?
I had no idea there was this distinction.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, so they owned how the artifacts get published and everything regarding the whole automation for building and testing of images. So I think there is a Tuesday meeting where K8s Infra group talks all the time. I think that is a good place to go to get your answer, to get that addressed. So I don't know what the time is. They changed the schedule, so I no longer have it on my calendar. But if you look at the community repos, you'll be able to find it, Claudia.
The test infra one, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other last topics for today or questions? I think, continue as usual, making progress where possible. This cycle is the standard modus operandi. Hopefully by next year, I will exit VMware product land a little bit and go back to broader upstream engagement land. But I don't see an end to that anytime soon over the next quarter. So, all right, last call. Yeah, last question, comments, complaints, concerns. Once, twice, 3 times. All right, we'll end it early. Get 24 minutes back. Thanks, everybody.